This is the Change My View podcast 2016 year-end episode. On today's episode, a roundtable discussion on the year and Change My View with moderators PepperoniFire, the top OP of the year, garnteller, and joining us again from our first episode on business is arguably the most successful Change My View newcomer of 2016, user Anzus07. In addition to the roundtable, we also have my interview with Change My View user *1. The OP making an argument that 2016 was not a particularly bad year by historical standards. And this was the highest ranked Change My View post relating to the topic of the year 2016 specifically. The Change My View podcast is the work of the reddit.com Change My View moderation team. And I'm your host, Michael Hatch, username mehatch. Thanks for listening. Now, on to the show.
It is December 19th, 2016. This is the Change My View podcast year-end recap. Today, joining us is PepperoniFire, third time now and moderator of Change My View. And we also have garnteller, who had the highest upvoted post of the year in Change My View as the OP. And returning for a second time, Anzus07 from our first in business episode. So 1, 2, 3, hello, Headzeus.
Hello.
And hello, Pepperoni.
Hello.
And hello, garnteller.
Hey there.
All right. So for the first part of this episode, we wanted to discuss the highest upvoted Change My View post of this year by garntellers. So the title was from 7 months ago, garnteller post on Change My View. CMV, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. And so what he goes on to say in the text is pretty short, actually. First one, supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical aquatic ceremony. Part 2, you can't expect to wield supreme power just because some watery tart threw a sword at you. Section 3, if I went around saying I was an emperor just because I got moistened, bent, had lobbed a scimitar at me, they'd be put away. And finally, in conclusion, however, given the current state of politics, I'm willing to consider alternatives to democracy. So, garnteller, I wanted to just get your initial thoughts looking back 7 months later now about the biggest post of the year. What do you think?
It's funny because I just was sort of doing it as a whim. The people who will get the joke, obviously, it's a reference to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and but it was something where I was sitting there, and with all the craziness in politics, I'm like, let's see what people think about this, and so I just sort of did it on a whim. Didn't really think much would happen with it. A few people who got the joke, but it just exploded and went on to the all and got a huge amount of attention and was really a blast.
And now, Anzus or Pepperoni, did either of you see this post in real time when it happened? Were you around?
I watched it a little bit, but I didn't participate.
Yeah, kind of same here. I saw it when it was posted, thought it was hilarious, but did not jump in for it.
So now, garnteller, this post, I could take it as your genuine point of view, but as a moderator, what are your thoughts on someone sort of taking someone straight out of a movie, which may accurately represent their view, but sort of is a little in the gray area there? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, honestly, it was something that I ran by the other mods. I think when it looked like it was getting some traction, I wanted to make sure. Yeah, I certainly, as a mod, don't want to be setting a bad example. But I think the cool thing, and we've had a number of these more, less weighty topics. The tricks rabbit. Whether sandwiches should be cut diagonally or on the side, pie versus cake. And as long as everybody argues in the spirit of Change My View and takes it seriously, they can actually be some really illuminating ones. So the other mods thought, yeah, it was absolutely acceptable, and we got some awesome responses, which was just great.
Cool. Well, looking at those responses, then I'm trying to see. The top one got triple gilded. We had 3 golds for King and Jello here, and so I'm wondering, should I give that a quick summary here?
Sure.
All right. So from King and Jello here, I'm just going to give a taste of what that top response was. I think a lot depends on the process by which these women distribute swords that then confer governing authority. If we assume that by strange, you mean that their motives and decision processes are opaque to us, sword distribution as election has one significant benefit over democracy, especially democracies like what we have in the US. Here, becoming a major office holder think president, senator, or Supreme Court judge, it requires a lifelong, single-minded commitment to the pursuit of power. You have to raise your profile through smaller elections, and you have to build your fortune or raise an amount of money to endure lots of humiliation, both in the foreign press and sucking up to people who don't because of their influence or wealth. Which what leads to this is an environment where only people who are power-hungry end up with the most power. What this leads to is an environment where only people who are truly power-hungry would ever end up in the most powerful government roles, and hunger for power often goes hand in hand with very undesirable traits for rulers. Lake sword-based autocracy, however, becomes, because of the strangeness of the sword distributors, can't be gamed in the same way, and so results in something more like a lottery, where people are chosen for government irrespective of their desire to be powerful. They would also choose them irrespective of their qualifications. But I think if you look at the last 3 presidents, you can find at least 50% of the country who thinks each of them was totally unqualified, and it's not like a democracy is knocking it out of the park there. Now, your question leaves the door open to only using the sword distribution as the basis for the system of government, but not the end-all, be-all. You could set up a system of checks and balances whereby the sword recipients pass and enforce laws, but those laws are able to be vetoed by a representative body or even a plebiscite. We could make it work. Edit, OMFG, my first gold ever. It's almost like I've been given a lake sword, and that was by King in Jello. So, Garn, what were your thoughts on that?
I mean, they really thought about the underlying political system that you could have based on lake sword distribution. And this was 7 months ago. I think what happened election-wise after that would add further proof to the wisdom in lake sword distribution.
And for the Redditors out there listening, this top response has 4,900 points in addition to its 3 gildings. So, but Garn, I don't know if you're looking at it in front of you, but I like that you created a new word there in the first sentence of your response.
Oh, yeah. So you were arguing that under certain circumstances, watery tartocracy could indeed be a valid basis of government. And which I really would like to then take further as a true proposal in government classes or something.
Wow. Well, just in hearing that, and Zeus and Pepperoni, any initial reaction?
Okay, well, I guess I was happy to see. I felt the thing that someone would push back on immediately is, I can't remember your word choice. Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses. And to me, that seems like the lowest hanging fruit that most people would cling on to. But this actually takes a pretty deep exploration into the possible merits of a sword-based autocracy. But I guess I found it interesting that you think this election would potentially prove the wisdom of that lake sword autocracy. I was thinking it might be the opposite, because he goes on or she goes on about irrespective of qualifications, when one thing that was talked about this election is how Donald Trump doesn't have the typical qualifications, and that might be a mark against him depending on who you talk to.
In my response, I actually went on and said, even without assuming wisdom as an attribute for the strange ladies, that it would be no worse than leader by lottery that was employed by some ancient Greek democracies. So there is that, is just randomness, even assuming that the person choosing the leader, doesn't have some special insight. Hey, maybe there is something to be said for, if we're picking an unqualified person democratically, well, heck, let's at least get the bias out of there and just do it randomly.
But Ansus, what do you think of just seeing this sort of wacky but fascinating top post of the year?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's wacky and fascinating. I particularly enjoyed when this one was popular, because it was right in the beginning when things were starting to get very fevered in the election, and it was a nice change of pace between a lot of the posts that we saw around that time, which was insert political party is evil and wants to destroy the world, change my view. So it was nice to have a little bit of humor interjected into it and have a lighthearted but still thoughtful discussion on this topic.
I have to agree with that. When you get these posts about the best grilled cheese is a sandwich or a melt, or peanut butter is better than jelly, those are just fantastic, because you get some original thoughts there from people who are very smart and who have thought about this a while, and they finally have their moment to shine.
Absolutely.
Which I guess in a way makes appropriate the King in Jello username of this discussion of leadership for the top voted comment. It's all getting kind of strange. Well, what do you guys think about the feasibility of a government by sword distribution.
Well, I think certainly the idea, as I referenced there, with, the leadership by lottery, there's certainly something to be said for that. And to a certain degree, that's almost what the voters chose this time, that it was somebody who was completely outside the system without the normal qualifications, that you really couldn't have randomly picked a more unpredictable choice than our president-elect. So, it's interesting in a way that 7 months ago this was coming up and that we did get this most unpredictable result.
Well, there was a bit of a trade-off there because the approval ratings of that Congress, I think, were in single digits. The vast majority of people wanted some kind of campaign finance reform. And you've got an inside Washington political machine that I think a lot of the Trump base was just trying to say no to however they possibly could. Is it worth it to have an outsider who, with the Hillary Clinton, you get, maybe 4 more years of Obama and I'll take corrupt over crazy. But is that good? Is there enough resilience built into the machine that crazy can be good from time to time?
Well, I mean, we have to remember that we're also imposing like the U.S. system of checks and balances in this scenario. It's one thing if you have like a random lottery for president and then you have the 3 branches of government and then the other checks and balances and like the federal versus state systems. These are all institutions that are designed to not play against each other, but bring a sense of balance or at least representation. Like I would be far less comfortable with this process if it was just a lottery and then like a monarch.
Any other thoughts there? Would the average random person from the population, let's say over 35, make a better leader than, say, a Trump or a Hillary to the opposite audience?
Well, I think we're going to find out for the first, this is, I mean, sir, I think the fact that no major newspapers endorse Trump, I mean, as being the least traditionally qualified person to ever serve as president. And we're going to see, really, does that matter? How is that going to affect things? Does it mean that some average Joe the plumber is somebody who would be a better president? I tend not to think so, but we're going to find out.
How crazy could he get, though? Like, how far outside the circle could it go? I mean, like, doing Supreme Court appointments outside of term? Like, what's the line?
Well, it's hard to say because in normal reality, back when we cared about checks and balances and both sides sort of had this, we need to work to make the country function as well as possible and be responsible, things were different. At this point, I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting to see, will Congress look and see if Trump's actions are legal? If the courts rule against him, I can see it being feasible that he ignores what the court's overturning things he wants to do and create a huge constitutional crisis. Generally everything has functioned based on the assumption that people are responsible and believe in the system. Here we have somebody who came in saying you can't trust the system, you can't trust the media. It's a whole new game. I don't know.
I mean, we have to remember that so far Trump has been violating a lot of norms. So they're outrageous, but they're not like bright line rules that are typically enforceable by any means other than just social sanction, like shaming someone. So it would really depend. Like if he did something that violated a bright line rule, really the hand might be forced and checks like Congress would have to operate against him. But I mean, as far as pushing norms is concerned, I'm with garnteller. Like I don't know. I am beyond making predictions because I've been wrong like this whole election.
Yeah, like I'm personally less worried about it than most people, just because I think whenever he gets into Washington and realizes the immovable object that is a lot of the systems there, that a lot of the talk and rhetoric that he's going to have is going to be just that, talk and rhetoric. It's not going to turn into actual policy or actual change.
Yeah, I mean, like, my primary concern is a lot less about him putting the policies he's promised into action, so much as how will he react to being told no.
Yeah, I think that's a fair concern. Well,
bringing this back to the change my view arena then, if Trump's surrounding himself, even by people who agree with him. There are going to be times when they've got to talk him out of it. Everyone here has had a lot of success in changing minds on Change My View. If you were brought in as that consultant for one day and needed to talk Trump out of something, is there anything you would do to adapt your ordinary strategy in Change My View to a situation like that?
I think our normal strategy would, well, I think most of us, and it'll depend if we agree on this or not, but we've all more or less come to the conclusion in the past that you want to appeal to the OP's sensibilities. Like if they signal a value preference, maybe you couch it in that value preference. So I would personally probably try to appeal to his vanity or his desire to be well-liked.
Yeah, well, yeah, I agree. I think he's certainly shown that his views are very malleable, and depending on who he's talking to, he'll say very different things, actually potentially contradictory things 2 days in a row, depending on who he's talking to. So, it's in some ways easy to change his view. The question is, what are the people who he's appointed going to do, and is he going to bother to get into those details enough to impact those?
And Zeus, what about you?
I think that the technique that I would use if I were there is I would try to convince him that whatever I was after was actually his idea. He seems to definitely think of himself very highly. And if you could draw him to the conclusion that you want him to reach, I think he would get on board with whatever that happened to be at any particular moment.
I think at this point we have to add any Dale Carnegie reference, like to the drinking game grid, because I think Blackheart quoted that almost the same. I don't know if you heard the last episode, but it's just funny that there do seem to be emerging these go-tos, and is the best advisor to Trump maybe not someone who pushes back, but someone who just understands.
Well, and like to Garn's point, I'm starting to wonder now that he's raised that if the issue is like not just getting him to think it's his idea or appeal to his sensibilities, but to make sure that your timing is good and that you're the last person to talk to him before he actually acts on that decision.
Yeah, the politics of physical space and timing in the White House there will get very interesting.
Yes.
Well, I just want to maybe we'll do one little more bit here on this post before we move on. But just going back to Garn here, and recapping on this post, I mean, I could look at a couple of the next top responses here, but I wondered if there's anything else you thought was worth pointing out before we moved on about your top post of the year here.
Well, sort of more a meta issue that I thought was interesting. We received a lot of reports from people. I mean, obviously super popular in general, but there were people who were really upset that, well, this is a silly post and it doesn't really belong on CMV, which is a subreddit of substance where important issues are discussed. And, it's fascinating to me that it's great that our subscribers feel that possessiveness of maintaining the high level of quality. And I felt sort of guilty in some ways of letting them down and being more frivolous than they wanted. But at the same time, obviously, it's, I think to have arguments about fun topics is okay too, and still valid and worthwhile.
I mean, in your defense, Garn, we have a history of letting people do quote unquote silly posts so long as they believe their silly view. And we let them operate within the universe, if it's a fictional universe, when doing that. So, I mean, the nice thing about this that was talked about earlier and that we can hit again is that we were having a lot of the same mirror conversations that we were having in the U.S. election, but we removed those personal allegiances that tended to cloud the way people would approach it. And I thought that was extremely beneficial as a thought experiment and a nice kind of reprieve from the election fatigue that I think a lot of people were feeling.
And anything else on that, Answers?
No, I mean, I think that summed it up pretty perfectly. That it was a wonderful way to take our personal biases out of it and have a more in a somewhat funny topic.
Yeah, that levity. It's like a place for real discussion about these topics doesn't have to be grave all the time to not have a productive and, actual, not serious, but, real conversation on it, that with real exchange of an understanding of both sides. So I was wondering what your thoughts would be just in a hypothetical to grow off of this, because the first thing that comes to mind to me, I don't think I saw in the comments, is that hypothetically, if you lived in this kind of a world where there is it's a little bit closer to real magic in some ways of this Arthurian sort of place. And if there were hypothetically like 1,000-year-old woman who did live in a lake, who maybe had like 170 IQ and had read like every book and just like pretty well-rounded competence in the area of selecting leadership, like maybe like a 95% hit rate versus like maybe say a 65% with democracy or something, like, could that work? Could you have an expert doing it, or would the very act of doing that be bad, regardless of her level of competence?
Well, I think it depends on the society that you're starting from. So, if you're talking about suddenly saying tomorrow, America, hey, we found this 1,000-year-old woman in Lake Michigan, and from now on we're going to do this, you'd have the problem that there isn't buy-in. That people are like, well, I have no investment in this leader personally, so any leader has to have trade-offs. There's going to be good things and bad things, and they're going to, your average person is going to just criticize everything because they don't even have the stake of, okay, yeah, but I voted for this person, so you at least have half the people who have some reason to support them. But if it's a society where you're talking about the divine right of kings and you're already having some sort of hereditary leader or other sorts of way of picking a dictator, then it's a whole different story. That's certainly no less logical than, well, it's the old king's son and we'll just have him be king.
Any other thoughts on the feasibility of an actual talented woman in a lake who's good at picking leaders?
I think it's kind of funny because in a way we almost saw the way America reacts to that exact idea. I mean, if you look at the two candidates that we had Hillary Clinton, who was effectively the person chosen by the lake. She's been grooming herself to be president for the last 25 years now. And so this was the person that if any aquatic-based system was going to decide on the leader, it's going to pick the person who's been preparing for the job, a third of their adult life. And yet we rejected that out of hand and chose, somebody different. So in a way, I think we kind of saw how we would react to that system. We would reject it.
I mean, on the one hand, it's really hard to argue with 95% hit rate. Depending on what hit rate is, I guess I'm not sure what the terms are for success.
Yeah, I can't back that up with more detail.
but I mean, like, just to, play with this in good faith, my question would be, like, if you have someone who's, like, super smart and is like this oracle, I think I might just be like, well, why don't you lead us? I mean, why are we even having this other conversation? We have an almost omnipotent being here who's apparently like very good at making decisions. So have at it.
As we were talking about what was the highest things of the year, and I joked that Garn, in having the highest post, what does that make him the Valley Delta Torian? But then we were also trying to figure out the highest deltas of the year, and there was something wrong with DeltaBot. But someone had proposed you to join because you had been so prolific and so quickly just in the last, I think, 7 months or so you've been here. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Something like that, yeah.
And so, you are bringing a very fresh perspective both to the subreddit and the conversation here. And so looking at 2016 as a whole, what's been your impression in 7 months of coming here and how it's gone?
Well, I mean, I've definitely really enjoyed the subreddit, really enjoyed the conversations. It was really a pleasure to discover it all those months ago. I come to it and read through things, at least a couple times a day, even now, even when I don't have time to actually respond to something. But I think it's been fortunate to have discovered it when I did, because this has been such an interesting year in terms of just the issues that have been raised, the changes in the American landscape, the values that have been questioned and brought to the forefront, and having a place where you can have spirited discussion about that and be able to come and say, here's what I believe, but I'm open to being wrong. And have people that are willing to have that conversation, talk you through it. Maybe they change your mind, maybe they don't. but to at least have intelligent discourse this time of all times, when there is so much unintelligent discourse going on in the world. It's really just, I think this has been a really...
Yeah, like something in the madness where if all that insanity could just hear a little bit of Change My View, it would be like a record scratch moment, and they'd all look over and be like, did that guy just say he was wrong?
Absolutely.
Like, what? Yeah.
I mean, I remember a couple months back, there was a post, somebody was saying that it was impossible to have a rational discussion on the internet. And my response to it was, well, you're here. Case in point, this very place that we're having this rational discussion, disproves your initial point. And I think that actually changed his view on the subject, but it was a very meta moment.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's something. I've had like Facebook discussion, where you have everyone's like, well, nobody's view changes on the internet, and there's studies about, of course, on Facebook, nobody changes their view, but of course, nobody's looking to get their view changed. But to be able to bring in Change My View as a example of, no, there are places on the internet you can go to actually explore ideas in a safe, informative way, and we see it every day that serious, significantly held beliefs change. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Now, since you've been here, Ansys, have you noticed any change within the culture of the subreddit, you'd say, in the last 7 months?
I think that's a really tough question to answer, just considering what's been going on the last 7 months. Because there definitely has been a lot of very serious and very polarizing conversation. But I don't know if I would attribute that so much to the changing culture of the subreddit and just to the what we all collectively went through over the last 6 months, and how this is probably one of the most tumultuous times that any of us can remember, at least in recent memory. And not even necessarily just the presidential election, but so many issues that are starting to get really serious discussion. The legalization of marijuana, what it actually means to identify with one gender over another, and how society needs to adapt to that. Just these incredibly deep and important issues have really come into the limelight of the last 6 months. So I think it's tough to really put a gauge against the culture of the subreddit with just so much going on in recent memory.
That's fair. Yeah, because it has been pretty dense to see through those fireworks. Yeah. Well, on a longer scope, then, to turn to Pepperoni and Garnteller here, versus your experience in the past and the last 6 months or a year or so, have you noticed any changes within Change My View and the culture of our subreddit?
In that time, well, certainly, over the years, there's definitely trending topics. So for a while, gender stuff, particularly on the men's rights versus feminism, was huge, and every other post was about that. Certainly transgender stuff has been there. This year, certainly politics has been a much bigger part of the conversations. There's not a tremendous amount of trolling. It's just sort of people get why we're here, our users support it. So I haven't seen a really wholesale change in the nature of the sub, obviously just on the topics that we discussed, though.
I largely agree. I don't think that the nature of the sub has really changed too much in the past 6 months. I guess the thing I'm curious about hearing from both Garn and Ansuz, because Ansuz is fairly new and Garn's been around for a while, is one accusation we would get as mods is that we give people a platform for less than benevolent views. And something I've been exploring is when do you start drawing the line, not necessarily in our sub, but with the principle of changing a person's view? When do you decide that you cannot reach out anymore and it's time for you to draw a line in the sand and stand up for the principle? We don't really give a lot of room for that in the sub, but I've taken a lot of life lessons from having participated here, and one lesson I've taken away is that there are occasions where you can't cling to the good faith assumptions you want to believe about everybody. And I'm wondering if you have anything to add on that front.
Well, so from my point of view, I mean, there certainly are topics that I either are too personally meaningful to me or too edgy that I don't want to get involved with, or that just it's such a horrible topic to talk about, that is just not something I have the taste for. There are times, though, that of course you can go in there and counter the counter argument. So, someone has a view that you agree with. All top level posts, of course, have to disagree with it, but you can then disagree with the disagreement, so that if it truly is something that's like, no, you really shouldn't believe that, then that's worth saying. On the flip side, I think most topics, though, it is always great, from my point of view, regardless of what I personally believe, to think about how I would respond to it, to understand, okay, there are people who believe this thing that I disagree with. What is the argument that is reasonable to them? Because everyone thinks they're being reasonable. So there is an argument out there, and the better I understand it, the better I can understand my own.
I mean, from my point of view, there's an old quote that I particularly like. It's sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think it's important that people, even if they're views that we find unpleasant, even if they're views that we find difficult, we have to give people a forum to voice those views if they truly are sincere about having them challenged and truly sincere about having their mind changed. Whether we succeed or we don't succeed, that's an individual case, but giving people a forum where they can be free of judgment to espouse something that may not be popular is a very important part of changing their mind and changing their opinion. And to tie it back to a lot of the conversation that we had in the first half of this, that there were a lot of people that we discovered hold some views that I think a lot of us disagree with in this country, but because for whatever reason they were shunned, they were labeled with particularly negative labels, they didn't ever voice those. They didn't ever bring them out into the open. They just held them inside and never allowed conversation about them because they were too afraid of whatever repercussions were going to come from voicing them. And that's not how people change their minds. People change their minds by having discussion, by being able to have a comfortable place to have those discussions. And I think this subreddit is an important piece of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember that people very rarely want benevolent views changed, and we often use it. If someone comes in and says something very mainstream, the usual example is like, CMV, black people are equal. And it's like, that's usually a very big tell to us that someone isn't actually being sincere. They're just fishing for contrarian views. But I mean, it's just interesting to think how it plays out, because you're often only interacting with an OP as a one shot. And I sometimes wonder how things would play out if you had an OP that you were familiar with, the same way you might talk with your neighbor once a day, and you got a really good feel for what their value system was by seeing a series of views and how that might influence what lines we draw in later conversations.
On the same topic of sort of what we allow a platform for, another thing that comes up and Change My View from time to time that we have to manage as moderators is we occasionally do get a post from someone who seems to potentially be suicidal. And so I think that sort of is something close to that category of, are we helping or hurting, or do we allow this to stay up? And I know this has led to some deep discussions between some of the moderators from time to time, where sometimes you're the only one up at night, or and this poor guy in the Change My View and other moderators to kind of be like, hey, what should we do here?
And so, I mean, from a policy point of view, we pretty much decided that that's not something that we're qualified to really deal with. And we don't, our people are well-meaning, but, instead the smart thing to do is refer them to, there's an excellent sub called Suicide Watch that has all sorts of trained professionals, and it has hotline numbers, and try to make sure the person gets help, as opposed to, just have us amateurs take a crack at it.
Yeah, I certainly don't envy the position that puts you folks in. I mean, it's got to be a very difficult situation trying to deal with somebody like that. But I completely agree. I think that's what you have to do. It doesn't matter, whether your heart's in the right place. When somebody's debating such a serious action like that, you've got to get them first and foremost to the people who can do the most to help them. And if that's any of you, great. But if it's not, then it's important to get them to professionals who can, hopefully talk them down.
We focus very hard on trying to get them into like a constructive channel, like Suicide Watch was pointed out. What we don't allow is if people are actively encouraging them to go kill themselves, like that's something we come down pretty hard on, and we'll even escalate potentially to admins. Mm-hmm. I think our most like charged conversation maybe was when we had a user who didn't want to kill his grandmother, but like wanted her dead, and it was seriously implied that like she was one, ill, and two, if she had a heart attack or something like that, he just let her pass away. And we were like, well, what do we do with that? Because he's not actively voicing a desire to harm someone, but at the same time, there was something about the post that struck us all as like very credible, and we weren't quite sure what to do. And I think we eventually settled on going to the admins, but it was definitely one of those gray areas where it's like, is this person here for catharsis, or is this person actually making a true threat?
We've introduced ourselves to some very gray territory just in what we do, and it's I think very new what we're doing in a way. I mean, a lot of it's been done before, but it's in this unique construction, and boy, there's been some weird moments for sure. Well, I had a couple of other questions lined up, and this is kind of for everyone. In a general sense this year, I mean, the biggest thing that really happened looking back was the election. Do you think we'll see any long-term permanent impacts on the culture of Change My View because of this contentious year?
I don't. I mean, I think, the topics will go back and forth, since Reddit as a whole is a very skewed demographic towards the educated, wealthier, or at least online to younger group, that already there's a different, it's not a cross section of America by any means, but I think it's going to stay pretty much the way it is, like it has all through the season. Just we'll see what they focus on.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, outrage tends to have a short half-life, so I think once things die down a little bit, we'll see things start to trend back a little more center. I mean, and we're already starting to see it. I mean, the number of like I should move to Canada, change my view posts have dramatically decreased over the last couple of weeks as people have started accepting and moved on to different causes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I don't think there was a lot of change during the election. We have a lot of very heavy norms that are policed by our users. And then we have a very active mod team. So the result has been a fairly static culture. I have seen like a really big thirst for the kind of outreach and listening skills that people want to cultivate. Literally the phrase changing views has come up a lot in like podcasts in the news. So I'd frankly like to see this grow and become like a recommendation whenever that enters the conversation. It'll be curious to see if the self-selection increases in such a way that the culture does eventually change.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic about it staying the course pretty well in the future. And hopefully we can stay that way for decades, and just to be a place where the world can do what it will, but this is always going to be a place well moderated where those discussions can happen. Yeah, I'm optimistic on it, just to do a fourth on that round. Now, I wanted to bring up here the other part of this podcast, not yet recorded. It's going to be an interview with user the square root of one. And I wanted to get your guys' take just on the topic at hand, just for the context of the larger podcast. So basically, the post that they did 22 days ago, and I think it did very well. Front paged, I believe, and the Change My View was a CMV. There was nothing special about year 2016. Bad events happen and people die every year. The internet just exaggerates everything. And I had a conversation with him last night just to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about. But one of the things that jumped out, I think, was that these celebrity deaths that people are saying are just unreal. How many celebrity deaths there have been? the argument from OP here, from the square root of one, is that, look, this happens every year and you're making too much of it. And so I wanted to get kind of your perspective on that idea of the end of the year when people look back and see who we lost. Perhaps he's statistically right, but is there some value for us in underlining it anyway,
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I would be curious to see the statistics. I know it certainly felt like we've lost a lot more people this year than in previous years, especially in the last couple months. I know it felt like every day I got up in the morning, I was like, oh, geez, somebody else died. So, I would be curious to see whether or not this year was actually an anomaly or not. Maybe it has more to do with the fact that it's been just such a topsy-turvy year. There's been so many things that have happened that we're just hypersensitive to all of the normal negativity, and we're just ready to just completely write off 2016.
Yeah, I mean, this is the year that I turned 30. So it hit me, I think, when David Bowie passed away. It was like more people aren't really passing away this year. It's just that people that I care about or that mean something to me in pop culture are getting older and the age where you can pass away. Like it's more that I care more and I'm paying attention to these people than I think that 2016 has been an anomaly.
I don't know. I do think when you look at the status of some of the people, obviously you're going to have a certain number of people dying every year, but the number of like truly beloved, iconic people, from David Bowie to Prince, Alan Rickman, who was just a whole lot of people who, Muhammad Ali, Gene Wilder. This isn't just a normal year. I mean, it's not just the selection bias. It really is, or confirmation bias. It really is weird how many iconic Arnold Palmer. I mean, just tons of people who were legends in these different areas who died and were so important to different people that they really idolized them. It's not like, okay, well, I liked this person. No, I really, Arnold Palmer meant a lot to me. He was an icon. Or Gene Wilder was a big part of my childhood. Things like that. So I think it was a pretty crappy year. And then throw in the politics between Brexit and Trump and things, and it's been a tough one.
I think you hit on something interesting there. Just the fact that it seems that everybody had someone that was an important part of their life pass away. That it was people from all walks, people that had influences on all ages. So it really doesn't matter what chapter of your life you're in. Somebody passed away this year that had a very profound influence on you as a person.
On a little bit of a different angle, but the platonic sort of shift of the level of some violence that we saw in Europe. You had two major events in France, and the weirdest one that hit me, I guess, was when Nice happened. I'm just another one. Because we want to keep this inclusive, old school liberal project going, but events like that give voice to some of the darker parts of Western civilization that it can be reactionary to it, and it's hard to find a place to settle.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I was focusing a lot on people dying, but I do feel like there were a lot of traditional narratives have been challenged, and not just in this drip of world events, but like milestones, like really official. Like there was a Brexit vote, there was a vote in the U.S., and we're going to have these actual official events that embody the attitudes that in the narratives that we've been seeing.
Adding to the celebrity deaths, but it's also the death of some idealism, or at least the very sickness of that idea of the inclusiveness, of the moving towards one world and seeing each other there. And I think for liberals, it's very much a rejection of what they thought was a growing tree of brotherhood, even though I don't think that's necessarily what the people who voted for other things were thinking. I think they were thinking better economic opportunity, but it manifested itself as this rejection of the progressive tolerance and brotherhood concepts.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anzus, PepperoniFire, and Garnteller, for joining us today for our end of the year annual Change My View episode. And good night. I'm here with user square root of 1, who had a post relevant to today's topic, the end of 2016. And that came to our attention as a mods and asked him if he would join us. So square root of 1, please introduce yourself.
My username is square root of 1. I've been using Reddit for a few years now. I'm a computer engineering student in Texas. And yeah.
Right on. Well, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time out of your day here. So I thought what we might do is just get right into your post to give people a little context of what you posted. Just to give a little statistical relevance, this was posted about a month ago, which is towards the end of 2016. And it got over 1,100 upvotes now that the score is settled in, which should have got it pretty close near to the front page, which is always exciting when Change My View's up there. And so, yeah, square root of 1, would you mind just basically telling us about your post? And if you want, you can start with the title and go from there.
All right, the CMV I made, the title of it is "There Was Nothing Special About 2016. Bad events happen and people die every year. The internet just exaggerates everything." So yeah, I made this post after watching a segment on the John Oliver show. I do watch John Oliver quite a bit. I mean, he made a segment about 2016 being a bad year. And I see this all over the internet, Facebook, Reddit. And it seems like everyone exaggerates this greatly. People think 2016 is a bad year because of celebrity deaths, Donald Trump being elected, and unusual things happening. And I mean, I love history, and the modern age we're living in is not that bad. You know, so pretty much I made the argument, or I try to have people change my view on why 2016 was a bad year. So that, you know, the main arguments I had was like celebrity deaths, they're irrelevant. Elections, they're irrelevant. And like all the bad things that happened in 2016, it's just a first world kind of problem, man. Compared to history, it's really not that bad of a year.
Gotcha. All right. And so would you say that the primary sort of straw that broke the camel's back here in terms of posting this was that the John Oliver video that kind of condensed all of that stuff into one place where you could be like, oh, come on, it's not that bad?
Yes, it is. I personally like the John Oliver show. I used to be very liberal, but now I'm more moderate. But some people argue that the John Oliver show is pretty much the liberal Fox News equivalent. But yes, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. When he did have that segment on there, I just thought it was ridiculous, you know. And I see it on the internet all the time, you know. Like, for example, like when David Bowie died or Prince died, like all of a sudden everyone's a David Bowie and Prince fan. You know, even people who are like 18 years old who I would have never guessed they listen to David Bowie or Prince. You know, I just feel like the internet is like a big echo chamber, and it's and people just follow trends and fads and all that. 16 was a bad year thing. It's pretty much like an internet fad, kind of like the all the challenges, like what is it, the mannequin challenge, stuff like that. It's an internet thing.
Gotcha. And so when you posted this up, were you expecting a heavy response, or was this kind of like just exasperation at one point? You just wanted to like dump it out there?
I did not expect so many upvotes and all that. I use Reddit daily. It's like Reddit is a big part of my internet addiction. So I love, like, every time I have like a controversial opinion or view, I love going on Change My View, and I like to see like the other side of the argument. I'm not tooting my own horn, but I like to see like the other side of the argument and actually try to get my view changed. And I was not expecting a heavy response.
So you were looking for a real discussion there. You were coming genuinely ready and open to see if you might be wrong on this.
Yeah, of course. That's why I posted on CMV.
Right on. And so going into the actual discussion threads here, if you don't mind, I thought I would read the top response here, for which you awarded a delta. This top comment is from user Akavodol, or AKKA-VODOL. 549 upvotes there. And here is the top voted response. And it goes as follows. Can we stop with the quote unquote first world problems being selfish and offensive? Because there is worse out there. Yes, there are people in the world in a very bad situation. Yes, there are people starving to death, losing their whole family in wars, or used as sex slaves. Does that mean we lose the right to worry about the problems of our daily life? How's it supposed to work? Do you find out what the worst things happening are and then forbid anyone living better than that from improving their lives? Quote, sorry, everyone, North Korea exists, so you don't have the right to complain about anything ever. You won't help people in bad situations by not letting those in better situations fix their problems. I don't see how me not trying to get better Wi-Fi connection is going to help a kid starving to death in Somalia, so I'm still going to complain about my bad Wi-Fi connection. I don't think the people dying from malaria will feel any better if I tell them that some guy on Reddit is calling offensive anyone trying to solve their first world problems. And that's the end of Akabodal's top voted comment here. What were your thoughts on reading that?
It was a good point. I don't think that user addressed the 2016 not being a bad year, but he did address my first world problem argument. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he made a good point.
Gotcha. And so if you had to kind of encapsulate the portion of your original argument that on which he did change your view, in that you delivered that delta there in your response, what changed?
Just like that argument he made about the first world problem, he's right. Kind of bring light to the fact that, we're living in like a developed country. All the people that are living in a developed country cannot really do much to help people in third world countries. I still don't agree that you should complain about, first world problems and 2016 being a bad year. The reason why I gave him that delta was because he made a good point that it's like, hey, you really can't do anything about those people in third world countries. So he's pretty much calling me out on that argument, which I did agree with him on.
And so here's the second top voted comment, which also received delta from you, and it's short and sweet. So this is from username Nonsense Poem, the number 2 top level response to your post. And I quote, "In 2016, my mother died. My gut shut down. Ilias, my dog exploded his spine. My job basically vanished, and a reality TV clown became my next president. I think my feelings towards 2016 are justified."
Yeah, I was laughing when I read that. I felt bad for the dude, so I gave him a delta. I'm a dog person, man. I felt bad for him, so
yeah.
He made a good point, though. It kind of gave me a chuckle, so I gave him that delta, man.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of
what would you say? In addition to the chuckle, but was there any portion of your original posting about which you changed your view because of Nonsense Poem's perspective there?
No, I don't think he changed my view. The only thing I didn't agree with him on was the reality TV clown becoming my next president. And I'm in no way, shape, or form a Donald Trump supporter. But the point I wasn't making in my post is personal problems. I feel like people having a bad year shouldn't be based off of the world's problems. Like dying kids in Syria. Dying kids in Syria has nothing to do with you, even though it is really messed up and sad. Usually, when people have a bad year, it's because of their own personal problems. And I think one of the reasons why I gave him that delta as well was because I didn't address personal problems as being one of the things I posted about. So yeah, so that's why I gave him that delta.
So it's kind of like they found a technicality.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I thought that might be a good segue into something I was curious about. And this is something I see a lot in Change My View. And there's actually different opinions about this, but it's sort of a meta question. And it goes as follows. So I'm just going to reread your headline again here. And it says there was nothing special about 2016. Bad events happen every year, and the internet just exaggerates everything. So in the first and third parts of that, if you count that comma as a period, there's 2 words that are absolutes, right? There's nothing special about 2016, and it exaggerates everything, right? So everything is an absolute, and then nothing is an absolute. Mm-hmm. Now, in posting those, it sometimes attracts responders to look for a loophole, like our second top rated comment here, right? He found that kind of loophole or technicality on, okay, fine, I didn't account for personal problems, You're not saying everything, literally everything, but you're using it in a normal human mortal colloquial that, yeah, we get what you mean, but it's not 100%. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I'm always curious then sometimes with OPs when they have something where you can tell, like if an OP's like, if you park in 2 parking spots, you should go to jail or something, you could kind of guess that in the last day or two, they had a problem with a parking spot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of these are sort of, I guess, temporal moments of CMVing, which, by the way, I can't think of a healthier way to digest something that bothers you than to go and ask people why you might be wrong about it, right? So I'm not like dog on that at all. But what I mean to say is, do you think this construction of your title might have been different had it been 2 weeks later?
Yeah, probably. My view has been changed a little bit, but I really feel that 2016 wasn't that bad of a year. And I guess like with post being popular and going on the front page, I think it's like right place, right time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I just posted it at the right time. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of the magic of this, I think, is when you catch that zeitgeist thing and it, even if it's something I'm like totally disagree with or whatever, it's like, okay, there was something there waiting to respond to this thought. And you don't know until someone like you makes the courageous step to put yourself out there and post it. So that I think that has value. But looking back on that, would you make any major restructurings to your opinion now? Like, do you feel like in any major way your opinion's changed now that you're 24 days later?
Just little things, man. Like the personal problems, I should have put that on the post. But politics, I still have a strong stance on, man. Politics comes and goes, I feel like, I'm no way, like I said, like I'm no way a Donald Trump supporter. And, I wasn't really a Hillary supporter either. But I really feel like people are really exaggerating about politics. But, that's debatable as well. And the celebrity deaths, I'm still have a strong stance on that. Are really not relevant to you having a bad year. Yeah. I'm sorry, but David Bowie dying, his music was all right. Prince's music was all right, but to say your whole year sucks because like an old celebrity died. I'm sorry. It's just some things have changed, just minor things. And with the CMV, I like to be not overly generous, but if people really make good points and they try hard to give deltas, I don't know if the mods like that. I don't know if the mods want you to really completely change your view to give deltas. But, some people tried and they made good points. I gave them deltas for that.
Well, in the same spirit of me saying, that it took a step on your part, you get credit for posting, and you should. I'm glad you brought that up here as a question because I think it could be useful to listeners who are also members of the subreddit and they're curious about that same question. And it's something that could be mistaken. And so, generally speaking, I think a delta would need to represent something, however small, an area in which you changed your view on something. And so, someone catching your technicality could count if you wanted to. So, I mean, if it was just a good point, but it didn't quite turn any cards, like you'd probably stay back from it, normally because like one of the requirements in responding is to say what you changed your view on. But just for those that are curious and listening, because it is something that could be misunderstood, because we are, for all of us here, I think in some very new territory in how this is organized, this whole methodical deltas and Reddit ranking things. I mean, I don't know how long it would have taken to explain this to a hunter-gatherer 10,000 years ago, but it's definitely a new human thing. So I appreciate that you bring it up and have questions about it so we can help clarify what this whole thing is.
Yeah, but you know what, Mike? I feel like one problem with the sub is that the problem one of the problems with the sub is like no matter how crazy a CMV post is, I think people deliberately just go like, okay, I'm gonna earn some points here. What can I say to earn some deltas? I feel like a lot of people do that with a lot of the CMV posts, even if it's like something crazy. Like I feel like all newborn babies should be buried alive or something, just something outrageous. I feel like there will still be people that will try to, convince that. You know what I mean?
Well,
I don't know.
Perhaps I'm missing something, but I think that would be a feature and not a bug, right? I mean, the whole point of the thing is to get people in there to change views. Let's say you liked bowling, right? And you're real good at bowling, and then you go out and you keep winning a bunch of trophies, and you keep like learning all the tricks you can to win more bowling trophies because you like bowling, and then having this whole incentive structure on top of it, it's like, cool, bonus.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think it's something as basic as, they're just people who like these kind of dialogues and cool, there's a bonus of some kind of recognition for having a talent in that area? Or do you think it's something distinct from the bowling analogy?
I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I guess that's probably a good thing that keeps subreddit going. So I just want to ask you. I mean, I don't know if you want to lead us on, but you encourage people to, even if they agree with OP, to try to change their view.
I mean, people can play devil's advocate to change a point of view, and I think that counts. OP, I think, is obliged to hold the view themselves, but I don't believe commenters are obliged to actually hold the counter arguments because they're not necessarily a view, but rather a critique. Now, you were commenting on this in some way as part of a generational or millennial issue. Is that right?
Yes, it ties in with the first world problem thing going on.
You yourself, if you don't mind me asking, are a member of any particular generation?
Yes, I was born in 1991, so I'm considered a millennial. I don't know. I see most millennials on the internet like this. A lot of the things about my generation I look down upon, and I believe this ties in with the 2016 being a bad year. The reason why is because in my post I made the historical reference of people in 1939 will be laughing at those who say 2016 was a bad year. The reason why I made that reference is because we're living in a scientific renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's arguable. I don't know if it's a renaissance, but we live in an age where all information is at our fingertips, and we have things like airplanes that can take us halfway across the globe in a matter of hours. Things like that. We take so much things for granted. We're not in a world war. Yes, there are conflicts in the world right now, but for the most part, things were not as bad as they used to be, given compared to history. So when people say 2016 was a bad year because of this one certain person being president and couple celebrities dying, it's not offensive, but it almost is. It almost is, because humans had it so rough. Like that 1939 Poland point I made. You could be sitting in your living room, all of a sudden, the Nazis, the SS are knocking on your door, telling you to pack your shit up, and you're Jewish, you're gonna get. You really can't compare this year as being bad as compare it to the rest of history.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the book called "The Better Angels of Our Nature" by Steven Pinker?
No, sir. I'll check it out though.
Highly recommend. Basically, what he does is he catalogs all those horrors you talked about in the past to argue the case of why, by the quantifiable measures that we can establish, we're in the most prosperous, peaceful time in all of human history. And I find his case compelling, and so I agree with you on the premise that we are very fortunate to have been born when we are and have things a lot easier. But just for any further reading for yourself or anyone listening, it's the best book I know of on that topic. But to keep myself a little more objective here. But I thought I had a couple of questions relating to that and just sort of the causal elements as you see it. Now, hypothetically, if you were to take the greatest generation, right, the one of the Tom Brokaw book of legend, the World War II generation, and, by some alternate comic book universe, those same people were born into our era, though, with our technology, with our conveniences. Now, do you think that generation as transplanted into our world would, if born as millennials, have the same level of first world complaint as you perceive the current millennial stock to be doing?
Yeah, yes, they would. No, they would just be like us, like if me and you were born like in 1929, and we had to fight for our country, we would do the same thing as that generation. I feel like humans are they're born like a blank slate, and the environment shapes us. So another point I want to make is it's not our fault that we're millennials as well. But I just feel like I wish my generation can be more aware of the fact that we take a lot of things for granted. Yeah, it's just I think people forget that the world was a much scarier place. Saying that this year was bad because of a president, your favorite celebrity dying is just irrelevant. So yeah, to answer your question, if that generation was born now and we trade places with them, they would think the same way as us. Because I truly feel when as humans we're born with a blank slate. I was born in the United States. I'm assuming you were too. If I was born in Iraq, I would probably be really religious. I would probably be a Muslim. Or if I was born in India, I would be a Hindu. We don't pick what time period we're born in. We don't pick what body we were born in. We don't pick our nationality. So I feel like everyone's a blank slate until the environment. But it's a complicated question because like genetics and all that.
Sure. It's a combination of, cultural and genetic influences and whatever X factors, depending on a person's particular theology about the soul or whatever. So what do you think of the people saying 2016 is the worst year ever and John Oliver and all them? I mean, if you sat them down in a moment of pure honesty, like, would you say, are you literally really meaning that it's the worst year ever? Or are you just kind of like using that as an exasperative hyperbole, an artistic thing? What do you think? I mean, do you think they really think that, or are they kind of just doing their job as a comedian to sort of create this thing at the end of the year, I'm
going to read the reply on that post I made. I want to read a reply by Use Your Glory to Hypnotoad. Let me see if I gave him a delta. I believe I didn't. But reading it now, I kind of wish I did give him a delta. This is what he said. He says, I think you're taking the sentiment more seriously than it's intended to. It's like how an Ask Reddit thread entitled some variation on most. It's meant to elicit answers like slow walkers and not child slavery. But it seems like the point he was making is I'm taking it more seriously. So I think that's a good point. Maybe I was taking it too seriously. But I would like to ask John Oliver and them, go like, hey, are you really? Was it just comedy that you're saying 2016 was a bad year, or is it just like is it like an internet joke?
Gotcha.
I don't know. I guess maybe I did take it too seriously. I don't know.
Huh. Right on. Cool. Okay. Well, no, that's a very open-minded view. To be sure.
I think it is easier to change one's mind in our modern world, definitely, because we have like information at our fingertips, pretty much, like the internet. And now, like, especially, and I don't know if I should be talking about religion, but it seems like more people are deconverting from their religion because of the internet.
I think that's an observation that's pretty hard to dispute by the numbers.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think the internet can change people's minds. I see people, but then again, like, there's this divide in our country with liberals and conservatives. It seems like more and more people are becoming like radical liberals, and more people are becoming radical conservatives. And like now, what you see on the internet is pretty much social justice warriors versus really politically incorrect people. And that's like, to me, that's like the big internet war that's going on right now.
Right.
There's like a lot of pages, and like you see it on Reddit too. People making fun of like really liberal, very social justice warrior type of people. And, these liberals and these Tumblr folks are making fun of like these conservatives.
So, well, yeah, on both sides, you can see situations not only where they're finding the most extreme version of the other side, but taking that version out of context and then misrepresenting it. And this goes for both sides. Or in some cases, completely fabricating like the fairy tale ultimate version of what their opponent could be in its most ridiculous final boss, final form, So, like, I mean, you see those things happening on both sides, and I wonder what percentage that activity is done by people who even hold those opinions. Like,
yeah.
Because if you sat them down and you said, "Do you really think liberals do X, or do you really think the average conservative does Y?" Like, well, they're not the average. Do you think it's fair to say that those loudest voices often represent extreme minorities on either end?
No, not really. It's so hard to tell. Like, I see so many memes on Facebook made by like really liberal people and really conservative people, to be fair. And like, I always like post. I'm like, are they just trolling, or do they actually like think this? Like yesterday I was reading a meme. It was like someone was like, you know what, we shouldn't discriminate people that don't have skills. I think people that don't have skills should get any job they want. And then someone replied like, so you want these people to be like a pilot? I think honestly, it's like just people trolling and just kind of making this caricature of the opposing side. But I don't know, man.
Mm-hmm. When you saw that the John Oliver thing and things like it that perhaps had built up to that, where John Oliver had done such a job of the crescendo of that idea, right? When you put your post up saying the year is not as bad as you think it is, what's the subtext of that? What are you saying there? What are you trying to get across in this?
Yeah, like the main point is, hey, like, tough it up. Your problems are actually not as relevant as you think they are. And one thing that I would like to say to both sides, hardcore liberals and hardcore conservatives, like stop being so radical. Most issues have two sides to things. And that's why I like this, the Change My View community. Because for the most part, I'm not speaking on behalf of every user, but for the most part, people on that subreddit do look at both sides. That's why it's one of my favorite subreddits on Reddit. Pretty much like, hey, not everything's black and white. I'm a moderate, man.
Mm-hmm.
So like, issues like gun control, abortion have pretty even. They're pretty even-sided debates, in my opinion. So yeah, I guess that's one of the that's like the subtext. Like, not everything is black and white, and yeah.
But this has been a really good conversation, and I appreciate that you've had the boldness both to post originally and then to have up here and have this conversation with me about it. So thank you for being open and taking the time, and keep an eye out for that posting when it's up, hopefully next Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to the Change My View podcast. We'd love to hear your ideas, thoughts, critiques, or anything else. So hit us up on Twitter at the CMV Podcast, all one word. That's at the CMV Podcast on Twitter. Have a very safe, happy, and healthy new year, and we will see you all in 2017.